Just turning 20 past here in the Russian capital. The loser in the Austrian presidential elections, which took place earlier this month, has spoken to RT's Sophie Shevardnadze. Norbert Hofer noted many in the country think mainstream media bias may have been part of the reason why he didn't win.
The people, they're a little bit afraid. And Van der Bellen says he would like to build somehow a United States of Europe. But this is not my way. What I would like to have is subsidiarity. We have to talk about the big things in Europe, but now we are talking about cloves, about bulbs and all these little things. And I think we do need new contracts in the European Union. If we are not able to do that, maybe in a couple of years, we can lose this European Union.
Your supporters blame the mainstream media for vilifying your candidacy. Do you have an understanding of why all of them ganged up on you? All of them?
It's because we have a strong system here in Austria. We had the two parties, the Social Democrats and the Christ Democrats, building partnerships for decades. It was always something between these two parties. You have to know that, of course, in the medias, there are persons working, members of these parties, Social Democrats, Christ Democrats, and some Greens. You have to know who is the owner of the media. So there's no strong media here in Austria owned by the Freedom Party, of course. So, of course, they are against you. So you have to become stronger step by step. And, yeah, I need maybe just another 6 years to win such elections.
Well, the Russian President Vladimir Putin, currently on an official visit to Japan, has shared his thoughts on the latest developments in Syria.
I expect that after successful military actions, the Syrian army would secure its positions and the civilians would return to normal life. The next step is to achieve a complete ceasefire all over Syria. We launched an intensive dialogue with the armed opposition, with Turkey as a mediator.
Well, RT's Daniel Hawkins has been following the two-day talks between Vladimir Putin and Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Let's cross live to him in Tokyo right now and get an update on what is ultimately the wrapping up of the trip. We understand, Daniel, a lot of issues were touched down upon, but of course one that was certainly mentioned, that of Syria.
Indeed, Rory, it seems that wherever Vladimir Putin goes, the question of Syria is almost inevitable, and surprisingly, of course, as a key global event right now. Putin mentioned several key things about that crisis. Firstly, the ISIS retaking of the city of Palmyra and surrounding areas. He blamed this very clearly on a lack of cooperation between Russia, the US-led coalition, and other partners in the region. He contrasted this to what's happened in Aleppo, of course, recently retaken, now under full control of government forces, where a negotiated withdrawal of the rebel groups has taken place in conjunction with negotiations with the Turkish President Recep Erdogan. He said this is an example of what can happen when everybody gets together and has cooperation and dialogue. Finally, Putin said that he would have talks in the Kazakhstan capital of Astana with the Turkish president in order to speed up the political process, not to undermine the Geneva peace talks, but rather to complement them to have a political resolution to this very bloody conflict.
We've been discussing the peace deal with Vladimir Putin and came to a mutual understanding, but it takes time to resolve this issue. We also discussed launching a special economic regime for joint cooperation on the islands, and I think it can lead to a solution on the issue of the peace treaty.
Daniel, a lot of issues being discussed there. Ultimately a 48-hour trip. We understand Japan's Prime Minister, the issue of the Kuril Islands came up. Can you delve into that for us?
Indeed, well, as you just heard there in that quote from the Japanese Prime Minister, apart from economic cooperation, closer ties to Russia, over 80 documents were signed today on various levels, governmental, ministerial, in a whole range of issues. What you heard there was the Japanese Prime Minister commenting on the issue of the Kurils. It's a long-standing dispute. He said that positive steps had been taken forward after a long discussion with Mr. Putin on that issue. Mr. Putin also said that finally the two countries had agreed that economic cooperation, joint cooperation, could take place on those islands as a first step towards signing a peace treaty that had been missing now for 70 years. He said this built up mutual trust between the two. The press conference ended perhaps on a slightly lighter note. Mr. Putin was asked about his Japanese dog, about his experiences in Japan. Mr. Putin said although his Japanese dog looked cute and fluffy, the pooch actually possessed quite a bark, as we saw. It's frightened quite a few Japanese journalists that have visited Russia. A fearsome puppy, it seems. Mr. Putin was also asked if he'd partaken in any Japanese rituals, traditions, food and drink, perhaps hot springs while he was here. Mr. Putin said the only hot spring he'd partaken in was the famous Japanese sake wine. Take a listen.
I managed to try only one hot spring here, a local sake called Eastern Beauty. I highly recommend it, though as we say in Russia, everything in moderation.
Makes a change perhaps from Russian vodka. So certainly a very positive press conference, a very positive round of bilateral talks, and indeed some landmark agreements signed today, Rory.
All right, RT's Daniel Hawkins there. Thank you. Well, Putin's visit has resulted in a number of cooperation agreements being signed between Moscow and Tokyo, which Daniel was just referring to. We spoke to prominent Russian businessmen in Japan about relations between the two countries.
I think that the countries are moving forward in the right direction. I'm talking about economic cooperation and development of the Kuril Islands, and I think it's a good platform and base for solving this serious matter.
Japan is the third biggest energy market in the world, and of course Gazprom is interested in this dynamic market, and we are ready to build up our supply. We see increased interest from Japanese companies to cooperate with us.
It's RT International. Thanks for joining us so far. Over 1 billion Yahoo accounts have been hacked. Boom bust now looking at the web giant's latest breach.